heard some men talking who are British citizens talking about the difference in this state. They were talking to an American about the difference between evangelicalism in the UK and evangelicalism in the United States. And one of the comments, a little bit in the same line of what you were saying, he said, you know, in America, many evangelicals have that political influence and political power. We lost that a long time ago. Therefore, we go about it differently now than you do, and how we go about it, because the culture in which we're living in is more, he didn't say hostile, but I'm going to use that terminology, or not as receptive, let's say, culturally speaking, to the gospel. Do you find that to be true, or do you think that needs to be a nuance on that?
The most important point to make in this area is the sheer difference in scale of the evangelical movements on the two sides of the Atlantic. In America, according to professions by individuals, there is a variation between something like 20 and 30% of the population who say they're evangelicals. Now, some of them don't go to church, which does seem rather peculiar for evangelicals. Are they evangelicals really? Well, who's to say, but they do claim to be. The equivalent figure is not 20% plus in Britain, but 2%. The evangelical community is tiny, roughly 10% of the scale of the American movement. Now, that's in proportion to the population. In absolute terms, of course, the American community is much, much bigger because America has a much, much larger population. So the difference numerically is hugely significant. British evangelicals cannot hope to sway public opinion on most issues at most times. The last occasion when they did was actually when Mrs. Thatcher was Prime Minister in 1987, when she introduced a bill into the House of Commons doing away with legislation restricting trading on Sundays. And the Sabbatarian feeling amongst evangelicals, much stronger then than it is now, led to pressure on MPs in her own party, in the Conservative Party, to vote against. And the only occasion on which Mrs. Thatcher lost a major piece of legislation when she was Prime Minister was because of an evangelical vote on that Sunday issue, which defeated her. Now, since then, there's been no significant measure where evangelicals have obviously had a decisive role. Clearly, evangelicals have shared with other Christians in promoting, for example, the Jubilee movement, which led to the abolition of debt from certain two-thirds world countries to Britain at the millennium, a very significant movement. The evangelicals contributed there rather than being the decisive force, which they had been in 1987. The situation in 2023 can be illustrated by an item in this morning's newspaper. I'm speaking in February, and today there was discussion in the newspaper of the candidates for the leadership of the Scottish National Party, and therefore becoming First Minister of Scotland, a very significant role. The candidates include several people, but one of them is Kate Forbes, who is a committed member of the Free Church of Scotland and an evangelical, therefore. It is thought by some commentators in this morning's paper that will rule her out of getting the leadership. Several commentators have acknowledged that she is head and shoulders above all other candidates. I think she is. She has been the finance minister in the Scottish cabinet for the last couple of years and done extremely well in difficult times. She's also actually a Cambridge historian, which I think is a very great virtue. So I think she has a very strong qualification for being First Minister. But her evangelical faith is thought to put her out of sympathy with contemporary Scottish cultural trends in the social sphere, and especially on gender issues. And those gender issues are now held up as a criterion of whether one can play a significant part in political leadership or not. And she is thought to fail by that criterion. Now, others are saying it's awful that somebody should be excluded by their belief from a position of political responsibility if they have the greatest skill, the greatest qualification. But I have a suspicion that that will prove to be a decisive factor in relation to her candidacy. She is a candidate, and if she were to become leader of the party and First Minister, I would be absolutely delighted, even though I don't favour the disunity of the United Kingdom. I believe in preserving Scotland as part of the United Kingdom. But I'd like to see her as leader of the SNP. But I fear that because of these issues, that's not likely to happen. So there's that marginality. Evangelicals in Britain are marginal in a way that they're not in the United States. That's the reality.